War games in arcades have always been very successful and popular. Afterburner, Operation Wolf, Atari Warriors, Russian Attack are all examples of this. When I think of war games, what comes to mind even more so than the soldiers are vehicles. Now when you think war vehicles, what comes to your mind? A jeep? A helicopter? A battleship? Or, are you like me, and a tank comes first to mind? One of the first popular tank games was Tank, released in 1974 by Key Games, a branch of Atari. You may know this as Combat, as the name was changed when it was ported to the Atari 2600. The game pit two players against each other, as they would try to destroy each other while taking cover in the game's various mazes. Now, hold your horses. This isn't the main game I wanted to discuss, but the game is worth mentioning because of its success and because of its control scheme. The game featured two push-button joysticks. This replicated your tank's track controls. Moving one up and one down would turn your tank. Moving two back would make your tank move backwards, and two forward would make your tank move forward. This was pretty revolutionary for the time and created a more authentic feel to the game. One game that continued with this control scheme was Battlezone. Battlezone was another Atari game under the direction of Ed Rotberg in 1980. The game featured, like Tank, two push-button joysticks for its controls, but added one more piece to make the game feel much more authentic and submersive feeling. This piece is the Periscope Viewfinder. The viewfinder was how the player would view the game. One would literally plant their face on the viewfinder as they would a real periscope. Oh, real quick, if you see these in the arcade, I recommend you use a disinfectant cleaning wipe on the periscope. I mean, come on, how many people's oily foreheads have been on this thing? Okay, back to the game. The viewfinder wasn't really anything new, as a similar one was used in the arcade game Seawolf by Midway, released back in 1976. Regardless, the incorporation of this in Battlezone really gave the game that extra style. The game was a vector graphics-based game set in the future. For you youngins who don't know what vector graphics are, they were projected electron beams that were used to create various shapes instead of using pixels. This gave a more 3D look to games, and was at the time pretty much the only way you could obtain 3D that was really cost-effective for an arcade game. Battlezone is set in the future. You control the last combat tank on Earth, and your duty is to save the Earth from the automated weapons ravaging the Earth. So you have total control of your tank, and you are equipped with a primary cannon, a radar scope showing the location of your enemies, and an occasional missile. You guide your tank through the various terrain, taking out primarily enemy tanks as well as flying saucers and these fast jigmabobs. The vector graphics in the game were handled pretty well. Enemy tanks look pretty good, as well as the terrain. Well, as good as what you could expect from vector graphics. What is kind of neat is you actually do see a volcano in the background exploding. Of course, at the time of the game's release, these graphics were considered pretty impressive. The game technically lacked color, as color overlays were used to give the black and white vector lines color. Sound in the game is pretty bland, as you really only hear your tank moving, gun sounds, flying saucer sounds, and a few explosions. However, with that said, it's really all you need in this game. It makes the game feel more authentic. Gameplay actually takes a bit of getting used to, and I have to admit, I was never the best player at this game. The game will get harder the more tanks you destroy, as the enemy tanks will begin to fire at you even faster than before. Because of this, hiding behind rocks and various terrain for cover is key. While Battlezone definitely isn't the most in-depth game, it's still a ton of fun trying to get a high score and learning the ins and outs of the game. The game is fairly common among arcade collectors. However, an extremely rare version of the game was made, called the Bradley Trainer, to help in training tank personnel's aiming skills for use in the real Bradley fighting vehicle tank. The machine was never released to the public, and it also used a different yoke-style control that was modeled off the real Bradley tank. This yoke would actually later be reused for Atari's Star Wars arcade game. Only two of these Bradley arcade machines are known to exist. Another difference with the Bradley Trainer version was that you actually didn't even move your tank. Basically, you only controlled the tank's turret. However, different enemies were incorporated, such as helicopters. A smaller cocktail version of Battlezone was made, however, it never made it past the prototype stage. One other version was released that was pretty much the same as the original Battlezone, however, it lacked the Periscope feature. Battlezone was ported to many personal computers, as well as the Atari 2600 home console. None of these personally captured the same feeling the arcade did, mainly due to the control scheme. In 2003, one of the greatest Atari compilations ever released was released for PS2 and Xbox, called Atari Anthology. One of the games included on this compilation was Battlezone. A cool feature that was included in this disc was the ability to play with or without the arcade overlay look. With the inclusion of thumbsticks on both the Xbox and PS2 controllers, you would finally be able to control your tank like you did in the arcade. Even more recently, a Battlezone remake was featured on Xbox Live, where the original and enhanced graphic version could be played. The game also made use of the Xbox Live webcam as well. Some of you might be saying to yourself, who the hell cares about these old Battlezone and tank games? Well, all I have to say is the next time you're playing one of those fancy first-person shooters on your console, think of how the control scheme works with your thumbsticks. The controls work pretty similar and were probably inspired by these tank games. So pay some respect to these great and memorable games.